Hey everyone, Gary Simon of Coursetro. So welcome to part 2 of the HTML/CSS/web design beginners project. So basically yesterday we created this design right here, as you can see, in Adobe Experience Design, and today we're going to take this and make it a reality in the browser with HTML and CSS. Now I approach this from the perspective that maybe you've never touched HTML and CSS. Definitely a beginner's tutorial. I'm not going to be integrating a lot of build tools. I'm not going to be using Sass because that wouldn't make sense for a beginner. You need to understand basic HTML and CSS concepts first. And so basically this is going to be a crash course. I mean, if you're a beginner, especially at the beginning, you're going to be confused a lot. But if you stick with it, especially more towards the end of the video, you'll have a better grasp. And then, you're still not going to be a pro. But if you stick with it, you'll understand it eventually, like anything in life, right? So today's question is do you have a goal of being a full stack developer, which is somebody who can handle every aspect of site development and design, or maybe you just want to focus on just design or just code? Let me know. I'll give you my answer in the comments, and let's go ahead and get started. All right, so here in Adobe Experience Design, you can see I added an artboard. Now I'm going to provide the XD file in the description here on YouTube. If you don't see it, remind me in the comments. Just in case, you don't want to recreate this second screen. So all I did was use this artboard tool over here. I clicked on it, you choose iPhone X, and then it's going to add an empty artboard. And then I just replicated some of these, or duplicated some of these elements to create what would be a mobile view of this design from the desktop. So, Control D, and then I just moved it over and then just changed up, and I did that for pretty much all of the elements here. Right, so nothing really major is happening, but it's important just to get an idea what the mobile view is going to look like using the same elements. As you can see, the biggest difference is there's no, by default, there's no navigation that's showing up over here because that's a common pattern. It's kind of unnecessary. People now associate this little hamburger icon menu with a menu that you click on, and then it will show up somewhere. And so we're going to be doing that with a little bit of JavaScript. Don't worry, it won't be too bad. And then also what are called CSS media queries. If this all sounds foreign to you, if you never touch it, then that's expected. Don't worry. I'm going to do my best to describe what's happening. All right, so we are going to refer back to this just to grab a couple of the assets, like this little background SVG graphic, as well as this little icon. So just leave it up. So now I'm going to create a new folder. You can do this anyway. I'm going to use a console here. So I have a code folder where I store all my projects. So make directory, we're going to call this portfolio. And after creating it, we're going to hop into it through CD portfolio. And then I'm going to type in code period. And this will only work for you if you have Visual Studio Code from Microsoft. And it's a code editor, and it's free, 100% free, and it's very popular, very powerful. So you just go ahead and Google it, download it, and then you'll be able to run that same command. And all it does when you run that command is it opens up the current directory. So here's where the files are listed. There's no damn file, so we have to create some. So what we'll do is we'll first create an index.html file. All right, and it is empty. So a real handy thing for Visual Studio Code is we can put an exclamation point and then hit enter, and it gives us some quick boilerplate. I'm going to hit Control and plus just to get a little larger font size for everybody. And throughout this tutorial, I'm going to be hitting Control B, and that gets rid of that sidebar. It just gives us more screen real estate. We could also hit F11 to get rid of that top bar right there. All right, so like I said, this is a beginner's tutorial, and I'm going to make the assumption that most or a good portion of you probably have never seen HTML, and if you've seen it, maybe you've never written it. With this in mind, the way this is structured is we have HTML elements in their tags. So we have this HTML tag right here. This is only ever used once. Everything goes inside of this. So as you can see, inside of these two tags, we have these head tags, and then we have more tags inside of that. So the way HTML works is you have a bunch of elements based on your needs, and then they are nested or not nested depending on what's necessary to build out the layout. So by default, every HTML document has these HTML tags. Inside of there, we have the head tag that's always there. This doesn't actually get displayed in the browser. This is just mostly just what's called metadata in the title. For instance, document will show up in the top of the bar, whatever you specify here in between the title tags. You also have other stuff that's not shown that you could add, like a meta description tag. We can see we have char set, name, HD. We don't really have to worry about these right now at all. We don't have to adjust them at all. But you also have the meta description, which gets shown sometimes in the Google search results along with the title, and also keywords for SEO. We're not going to mess with that. We're just going to call this my portfolio. All right. And then we have the body tags, and the body is where we're going to be writing all of our HTML. All right. So having said that, we can also, where would we write the CSS if you're wondering? Well, we could write it inline in this actual HTML document, but a better practice is to confine all that in its own CSS file. So you link this up by, and you could do this anywhere inside of the head tags. It doesn't have to be before or after the title or whatever. We could just type in link, enter, and then we reference in this href attribute the location of our CSS file. So let's hit save. It doesn't yet exist, so let's create it. Control B and main.css. Now, for a lot of serious projects, you'll create a folder that has a CSS file inside of it. Like for instance, this creates a new folder. We can call this CSS, and then we could put the main CSS in it, and then just reference CSS/main.css. It doesn't really matter for our cases. We're only going to have one CSS file anyhow. All right, so let's go ahead and save that. And the next thing that I wanted to talk about is what's called the live server in Visual Studio Code. It's a real quick and easy way. It's very beneficial, especially when you're working with HTML and CSS, to have what's called live reloading. So I believe by default it has this integrated. If Visual Studio Code doesn't have live server integrated, then you can just Google Visual Studio Code live server installation, and it'll show you how to install and add it. Once you have it added, we can right click and open with live server, and it's going to open up a browser at localhost, or in other words 127.0.0.1 at port 5500. I changed mine to 5501 at index.html, and this is our very blank index.html page. So now we can use this and look at this going forward, and revert back and forth to it as we write the HTML CSS. And then every time we save the document, it's going to refresh or reload this for us automatically. So we have to sit here reloading the page by default. All right, so going forward, let's start thinking about the whole process and how we approach starting to write the HTML and the CSS respectively. So if we go over here back to our Adobe XD document, we can think of everything as blocks. So first we have the outermost artboard, and you could think of this as being, real quickly go back here, the body tag. All right, that's the very first element, and we would reference the body tag in our CSS because the CSS gives it style. It allows us to control the visual aesthetics of these different block elements. And so if we go back to our main.css, the way we reference that body selector is through body, and then we open up in squiggly brackets. All right, now if we hit save, nothing's going to happen. It has this little thing that says CSS does not use empty rule sets, because this is right here a rule set. So we have our body. We want to give it a background color, for instance. Then this is how we reference it, and inside of here goes CSS properties and their values. All right, so what do we want to change about this background here, or the body element? Well, we can see we have a gradient based background, and that's what we want to apply to it. By default, it's white. You wouldn't need to specify any type of background if you have a website or an app that has a white background. But because we have something different and unique happening, we have to reference that and change it in CSS. All right, so how do we add a gradient? So first of all, let's just talk about adding a background in and of itself. Well, there's a property called background, or background-color to be specific. And we can just give it a hex code, color code, or sometimes if you're using just a straight up green or red or yellow, you can put that as well. So if we wanted a yellow background, we just type in yellow. We end it with a semicolon for the value, pretty much standard practice across all CSS property and value pairs. There you go. We have a yellow background. Very exciting. That's the end of this tutorial. See you guys later. No. We want a gradient though. So how do you do a gradient? Well, there's several different nifty CSS gradient generators, and they're web-based. So if we just go to Google and you type CSS gradient generator, we can click on the first result. There's other results that you could use as well. And we have this little web-based helper here. So if we just click on some of these presets, all we want is from one color going to the other. So we can remove these little color stops right there. And then we can go back to our Adobe XD document and we can click on our gradient. So the first color, the hex code is right there. We copy that. And really this is the one, it's all the way up here actually. So the first one technically, if we're looking at it from the going from left to right, is this more blue purple color. So I'm going to click that, or copy that rather. We'll go back and we'll double click this and just paste that in right here and hit OK. And then our next one, we'll go ahead and grab this color. So it's E600FF. Double click, paste. There we go. Now, orientation. This is the orientation of the gradient going from left to right. So it's diagonal pointing up. So now, once we have that, we can just take everything in here and copy it. So just copy that and we'll go back to our code editor. All right, and let's get rid of that and just paste all that stuff right here, Control B. And this is everything. Now you may wonder, why is there multiple background properties? Well, that's because when it comes to linear gradient CSS, the value, different browsers, because there's Chrome, there's Firefox, there's Internet Explorer, and then there's older versions of it. When it comes to something like a linear gradient, you have to have vendor prefixes, as they're called. So Mozilla, this is WebKit, and then there's just a standard linear gradient, and this works in Chrome. You can also see for older browsers, it's just going to give you, older browsers won't even support this. But really, that's a very tiny percentage of the browser market. So now, if we go back, we have our gradient. Very exciting stuff. Okay, so that's how that works. So now, let's go ahead and start thinking about what would the next step be? All right, well, let's go ahead and revert back to our Adobe XD document. This is why it's so important to have, a design or prototype so that you could refer back to, and it makes the process of writing your HTML and CSS much easier. So the first thing we have is kind of like this container, this overall construct. But really, in terms of columns, we have this one, this little sidebar, and we also have this main content area right here. So we're going to focus on this one first. All right. So how would we first define that in the HTML document? Okay, so because that's the first process. You need the HTML in order to use CSS to style it. So we have to ask ourselves, really, what is that anyways? What was it that was being defined? It's a sidebar of some sort. And in HTML, and HTML5 specifically, we have what's called an aside element. So we would use an aside element to create that block from which we can then use CSS to structure it. So the way this looks is aside. And there you go. We've created that block that really, with CSS in a bit, we can create this whole container right here in this whole area. And then inside of it, we're going to nest in, you know, the avatar, the name, the navigation, etc. So how would you know that we had to use an aside element? Because there are other elements that you could have used to structure it, like a div element, which is kind of like a generic layout based element that you could use to structure layouts. Well, the best way to do it if you're brand new to this is just go to Google, as always, if you're not certain about something, and then just type in what you're thinking about. I would put in something like HTML element to use for sidebar, and then just go through the results and see what people are recommending, and see what the official, there's some official W3C specifications that you can look as well. All right, so that's going to be basically how you learn in the beginning. A lot of Google, even though I'm showing you step by step. But when you do this on your own, you're going to come into a lot of scenarios that I'm just not able to cover. All right, so we have this. We're going to have an aside element, and then inside of it, well, instead of waiting or putting everything inside, let's also define this main area as well, the second column. And so there's also a specific HTML element that you would use for your main content area, and it's actually called main. All right, so we really think at this point you can think of everything occurring here as blocks. So we have three elements. We have our body, we have our aside or sidebar, and then we have the main area. All right, so far so good. All right, now remember when I mentioned mobile first. What does that mean? Well, if we go to, I'm using Chrome here, and we hit Control-Shift-I, and we come over here in this little icon, Toggle Device Toolbar. As you can see, now it's showing us kind of like in a phone orientation, and you could change the phone right here, or the device. You can even do iPad. So like iPhone X, for instance, that's going to give you the exact orientation and the pixels up here based on what it looks like. All right, so that's what we're going to do at first as we start to work with this. So actually what I'll do is get this a little bit more situated here. Okay, so now I've taken this this editor here. I know my head is in front of the bottom of it, but that should be fine for now. And now every time I save some code over here, we'll be able to see it update over there. All right, so let's actually start to structure, you know, what this should look like on a mobile device. So as we can see, it's going to look something more like over here by default. All right, so let's focus on the content that comes in our aside element. So on the mobile version of our site, the aside element is really just going to be like kind of like a top bar. It's going to stack on top of the main content area. All right, so right here in our aside element, we'll have another HTML element that's used commonly, you know, for our use case, where you're going to have maybe an avatar plus a user information, like a username, and that's called figure. Inside of figure, we're going to have a div element. Now, normally this would probably be an image, because now we're going to start targeting like the actual image. Now, I want you to notice something. I decided to omit this little user avatar right here in the mobile version, because I just don't think it's necessary. It might clutter it up too much if you have it over there. You could argue that you could just add it, but I chose to remove it just to show you how you can conditionally remove things based on the device that's viewing the web app or web page. So we still need to include the HTML that's necessary for this, because the desktop will have to have access to that as well. So you'll see how this works. If you're confused, trust me, it's expected. Now, normally an avatar would probably be an image tag, but really I'm not going to use an image, so I'm just going to use a generic div tag with an ID. Now, an ID is something that it provides the CSS with a way to reference this specific HTML element, because a lot of elements you may have multiple div tags, so an ID will give it a unique identifier. All right, so we're just going to give it some name that's relevant. So we'll just call this avatar. and it's just going to be an empty div. And then the next thing to worry about is the name, and that's when you're using figure, you can use fig caption for that, and then we're just going to put Johnny Doe right in there. All right, so this is what our strange looking website looks like so far. All right, so now coming down here after our figure, we're going to have our menu. So I'm going to put in image source equals images. Now this folder doesn't exist yet. We're going to create it. Menu.svg. All right, so if I save this, we'll see a broken image right there. Let's go ahead back down to our Adobe XD. We're going to make sure this is all in its own group in the layers. We can just call this menu. And then we're going to export it. Now, I will provide a GitHub URL for this project so that you won't even have to do this. So I'm going to export selected, and we want to change this to SVG. And we're going to go ahead and change this real quick. We have code, portfolio. We're going to create a folder here called images. Select folder, hit export. There we go. Now it's showing up real big. Now that's the power of CSS. We'll be able to change that and make it look much better as we go forward. Also, we can notice how the background seems to repeat based on the content that's in there. So we can make a quick adjustment, a quick fix to this down here. So inside of the body tag, by the way, I select everything, hit tab just to tab everything in. I'm going to put background repeat is no repeat, and then also background attachment fixed. All right, so how would you know to do that if you're a beginner? Well, again, Google. Just type what your issue is, what you saw, plus the keyword like CSS or HTML, and you'll eventually find the fix for it. All right, so now we have this image here, and I would say at this point we can go ahead and start writing some HTML. Some people prefer to write all the HTML first and then just none of the CSS, and then others prefer to start writing the CSS, kind of like going parallel, after specifying, the HTML an element, and then just go back and do it. There's no right or wrong way. It comes to your preference, really, ultimately. All right, so the very first thing I want to do up here, aside from this body element, when it comes to CSS, we can specify multiple selectors by separating them by comma. And a common thing to do is to reference the body in HTML. I'm going to put in a height, and this will come in, this will be important a little bit later on, but I'm just kind of getting it out of the way. We could say height 100%. Nothing changes now, but I'm actually going to use a calc function. And yes, you can put functions in CSS, and calc allows you to do basic math. So if I say height 100% minus 2em, and an em is a unit that you can use for scale and size. The reason I did this, I'll try to remember to explain going forward. So height, we're going to put a margin of 0. Margin's another property where if you have a block element, you can control how much space or white space is outside of it. Padding is opposite. It applies to inside of a block element. And so we're going to be using both. Font family, I was using a font called Montserrat. And that's going to change. You can see it change from that serif font to this Montserrat sans serif font. I already have it installed on my system, so that's why it's working. However, if you're doing this for production, you can't assume everybody has the same font. So what you would have to do is go to, where are we at? There we are. Go to Google, and you go to Google Web Fonts. So google.com/fonts or fonts.google.com. We do a search for Montserrat. All right, and it's right here. We click plus, and then we click over here, and hopefully I'm not in the way. No, I'm pretty good. And we said we have a section where it says embed font. We can use import. and we can copy this line right here. Now you may want to customize it to include like a bold version, and then just a regular version is fine. So now we go back to embed, we use import, we copy this right here, everything between the style tags, and notice this, it specifies, it tells you the property as well that you can use. So just copy this. We'll go back to our document here. Where's it at? At the very top, we copy, or paste rather, that URL. So now it's going to work for everybody, even for people who don't have it installed. All right, and then the next one, the next element is our aside element. So let's specify the rule set for that. So it's aside. All right, and so we're going to say, well, what do we want to change about aside, or any of the things that are inside of it? Well, we can see it's black, and our text is white. This Johnny Doe right here. So we're going to say color. Now, when it comes to color properties, you can either, like I said, you can just use straight up white, or you can use RGB. You could use your hex color codes. There's a lot of different ways to specify colors. For me, if you can also, the shortest way of specifying white in terms of the fewest amount of characters is FFF. And that is white, as you can see right there. All right, so what else do we want to do? Well, we can see that if we're looking at the structure within our aside element right here, we have two columns. We have this guy over here, and then we have this over here. These are floating to the left and right of each other. And there's a lot of different ways to structure a layout when it comes to columns and rows. But a relatively new and popular way is the CSS grid, as it's called. All right, so the way we do this is we put a display of type grid. You can also put display block, display inline grid, or inline block, display flex, but we're going to use display grid. And so with display grid, we can also add, we can define how many columns are inside of this aside container. So that would be grid template columns, and we'll say auto 40 pixels. So the way grid template columns works with its properties, and by the way, you can do a search on my channel for CSS grid. I have more, introductory style content for this. Also use Google, but you can use grid template columns, and then you use, for every column you want. If you want a column that's 50 pixels, and then another one that's 30 pixels, and then another one that's, whatever, you just keep on adding the values here. So I just want one that says auto, which means it's going to take up the space it needs to. And then the last one is going to be 40 pixels, because I know that's going to be the size of that little hamburger icon menu. So 2 columns here. All right, and then we're going to put padding, and I'm going to put 2em. Now, when it comes to units, you can use pixels if you want. I'm not going to describe all the different units. You can go to Google and just type those, like CSS, EM unit, etc. And now if I save this, we could see that we have our 2 columns here. Yeah, the icon's real large, but we can go ahead and fix that momentarily. Actually, we'll just do that right now. The image. We reference the image tag because that's the tag we're using for the SVG. All right, we're going to make the width, another standard CSS property, 40 pixels. There we go. That's looking a lot better. We're also going to put in here cursor pointer. I'm not going to save it yet, but as we could see, when we're in this mode, it's not going to show a pointer or not. But if you're on the desktop, because it's not a link anchor or a button of any sort, instead it's just an image, it would just, the icon wouldn't change. Actually, let me show you. That's the easiest way to do it. So you can see nothing happens, but if we save this now, ta-da, it changes automatically. All right, so let's keep on keeping on here. Let me get this situated. Okay, so continuing on, We have our image tag. That's all ready to go. Let's go ahead and focus on our main section. Actually, let's not do that. Let's focus on this area right here. So inside of our HTML, we have our what's called our figure and our fig caption. We can see this doesn't look right because there's a lot of margin and padding potentially around this element. So let's fix that real quick. So we're going to put figure margin 0. There we go. Now it's all looking a lot more consistent with what we have going so far. Now let's say fig caption, which is what's holding our Johnny Doe text. That's the element. We can say font size 1.3 EM. All right, so that just made it bigger. And then font weight bold. Great. Now let me give you guys a pro tip here. Let me just real quickly get rid of all the figure and the fig caption we just added. You don't have to do this though. We're back to this and you're wondering, well, why does it look like that, right? If we use this little selector icon, we can click on, for instance, any of these elements, and then it's going to show us the associated HTML right here in this elements panel. We can start to click on something specifically to see the properties down here under styles that are showing up for it by default. As you can see, there are some default CSS properties that are added by the browser automatically. So we can see there's a margin of 1 EM and margin start 40, all this stuff. So you can see that's why it's happening, is because margin was applied to it by what's called the user agent style sheet. So to fix that, then that's why we would add margin 0. So we're kind of just resetting it or overriding what the browser is trying to do. All right, so we save that and there we go. So that's something, and you can also, by the way, write CSS right in the browser in this section right here. So element.style, we could have just added margin 0 and just seen if that worked, but that's not going to save it to your file over here. You actually have to write it in the file. But this is a quick way to experiment and just test potential CSS properties. So if you like something or that you did in here, you have to put it in the CSS document. All right, so let's get this back up in order. Okay, so let's continue on. We have our the next element that we want to worry about is our technically it is the unordered list that we have, our navigation section. All right, so coming down here, I'm looking offside to my reference monitor real quick. We're gonna have outside of the image right here for the menu, we're going to have a nav element, and a nav is an HTML element that you typically use to build out your navigation, or at least house the like an unordered list, which is what allows you to build out each individual link, like home, about, contact us, etc. So the way I'm going to do it, which is a common way, is an unordered list element, a UL, and by the way, when I may not be able to describe every single thing here, but just, if you never heard of a UL element or unordered list, go to Google, type HTML UL. You'll get good tutorials on this. And then inside of the unordered list goes, you nest in LI elements, which are list item elements. And then inside of the list item, for instance, if I just put home, we'll see it says home, but it's not a link. We want it to be clickable. So we wrap it in an anchor text, so our anchor tag, ahref. Now href is an attribute that you add to your anchors to define where it's going to go. So if it was like a website or something, you could just put / here. For us, these aren't going to go anywhere, so we're just going to put the number sign. And then the anchor text that goes inside of it is wrapped around the closing A tag right here. So now it's a very ugly link. So to save space, we don't need to do this. I'm just going to put everything on one line for these list item elements. Here in Visual Studio Code, a good way to copy and paste this, because we need 3 more of these, is you hit Shift, Alt, and the down arrow key. All right, so now we can change this one up to About. I think I was using About Me. Portfolio, and then Contact. And again, this is all coming from, you know, what we defined here, right there. All right, so that's what this looks like. Obviously, we have quite a bit of work here. By default, though, this unordered list and this whole nav section is not going to be shown, or at least the unordered list won't be shown. It's only going to be shown when this is clicked. But we still need to style it and see what it looks like. All right, so if we go back to our main CSS, we're going to put in a reference our nav element. And we're going to say background is white. All right, that obviously looks horrendous, but that's okay. We're also going to have a class that's called active. Now, I haven't talked about what a class is yet. We're going to place onto this unordered list a class equals active. So when it comes to referencing elements, we have the ID that I just showed you. When you have like a unique element, it's only going to be there once. But we also have classes, and a class sounds like it will sound. There could be multiple classes applied to this, like if you had a footer element as well. So what we're going to do, and by the way, we're only just adding this class on here temporarily. We're going to remove it for production, but going forward and a little bit later, we're going to have JavaScript that's going to automatically attach this class every time this icon is clicked. All right, so for now, just so we can see what's happening for development purposes, we're going to add class permanently, but really it's temporary. All right, so active, we're going to say we want this thing right here to look more, well, I never designed for it, but it's going to be a it's going to look like this actually, real quickly, just to show you. This is going to come out right around here when this is clicked. All right, so to do that, we need to apply position absolute. All right, and then we're going to put in display block, and then background will be FFF. We're going to have the width at 50%. We're going to have left 0. And left and right, as you'll see, is used in conjunction with position absolute. Absolute really allows you to place an element anywhere without worrying about where it's currently at. So if I put top 0 as well, there we go. Now let's also put height 100%. All right, and so this padding that's showing up here, even though we put top 0, which basically means it's going to position at the very top of the viewport, there's still margin showing up in our padding because of our unordered list by default has some default CSS that the browser adds. So let's reference our unordered list element, this UL element right here. So we'll put in UL. We're going to put display. Now, this is where we would put display none, because by default, we wouldn't want it to display. But we're going to leave that off for now, just because we want to see it. So we're going to put list style type none, and that's going to, by default, you can't see them, but there's little circles that's showing up right next to or to the left of each list item. That gets rid of those. And the reason we couldn't see it is because the background as well was white. And then also we're going to put margin 0. There we go. We get rid of that padding at the margin at the top, and then padding 0 as well. All right, so let me extend this or shrink this in just a little bit so we could see. So that looks obviously horrible, so we need to add padding because we need to add padding inside of this element. And we can do that through our list item A, our anchors right here. All right, so to do that, we're going to have a bunch of properties on UL, LI, A. All right, so text decoration will be none. That gets rid of the underlines, as you can see. Text transform, we can say uppercase. There we go, because we were using uppercase in our prototype. Font size, it's a little bit big for me, so I'm going to say 0.8 EM. So you can do, decimals. We're going to say display block to turn them into block levels, and this will allow us to add padding onto them. So we're going to put padding, and padding is in margin is very cool in the idea that you can just put one value like 3 EM, but you can also do it for top, bottom, left, right. So if you want, if you know that you want both the top and bottom to be 1.5 EM, and then also the left and right to have 3 EM, you can do it like this as well. All right. Now let's also here, we're going to put in a specific background color. And this is more setting ourselves up for the desktop version. But if you recall, when we did this design, this block right here, and this is what we're kind of styling right now, it has a little bit of it's a little bit lighter. And if we click on it on the fill, we can see that it's all white, but our opacity is down at 35%. We can mimic this exactly with CSS with the background color properties. So we can say RGB, which is red, green, blue, A, and that's for alpha or opacity. We can say the RGB value for white is 255, 255, 255, and then 0.35 for our opacity or alpha. We're not going to see this now simply because the background's already white. It's white on white. But in the desktop, you'll see how it will be added for us. All right. So so far so good. This is the way this looks like right now. Oh yeah, let's also change the color. That might be a good idea because our color is black. So this looks good. I'm happy with it. I'm fine. So now what we're going to do is go ahead and put display none. All right, and then on our active class, we're going to remove that. So now it is hidden. But if we click this, nothing's going to happen because we need to have a way of attaching conditionally based on a click event that active class. So that's how we toggle on and off. So if you never touched JavaScript before, you're going to be probably very confused at this point, but don't worry. I'm not going to sit here describing too much of exactly what's happening, but just before the closing body tag, we're going to add some what's called vanilla JavaScript or just straight up JavaScript. We're not going to be using jQuery or anything like that. We're going to put in a script tag, and inside of here, this is where our JavaScript goes. So we're going to put in a function. And inside of here, we're going to create a variable called menu, and we're going to bind it to document.querySelector. And this allows us to target one of our selectors, our HTML elements. All right, so we want to be able to create a variable called menu that's on our unordered list. So as far as JavaScript is concerned, unordered list now equals menu, and we can access this shortly. We're going to put a comma at the end to also specify another variable called menu link, and that will be our document.querySelector. Once again, image. All right, so we need access to the image right here so we can determine when it's clicked. All right, so we put a semicolon at the end to end this statement, and then we're going to reference our menu link dot add event listener, and it's a type click. So when somebody clicks on it, what's going to happen? Well, we're going to have a function where we say menu.classList. So the menu, of course, is referencing our unordered list. So the class list, it allows us to add classes or toggle them. So active. So that's the class, the name of the CSS class that we have over here. It's called active right there. Toggle means it's going to add or remove it. If it's added, it's going to remove it. And if it's not added, it's going to add it essentially. All right, and then we're just going to add e.prevent default every time. Sometimes if it's an actual ahref link, it may try to reload the browser or whatever. This prevents that. So now we have to end this just like that. Now if we save this, we can click it, and there we go. It is showing up. Now I'm not going to show you how to add animation. That kind of will go a little bit beyond the scope of a beginner's CSS tutorial, but now it is working exactly as it needs to. Okay, so let's continue on and finish the actual HTML. So we're going to have, let's see here, an H1 element, and that's a heading element. And there's H1 through H6, and you use them in order of importance. So our main headline is going to use H1, and I'm a designer of things. That's what I specified before. And then also a paragraph is going to be underneath it. So that's a paragraph tag, and we put our content inside of there. So if we go back to this section right here, oops. All right, we'll just take this, copy it. By the way, I was just about to upload this video. I just went through this and I realized that the next 25 minutes of the video, my recording screencasting software froze the frame. So I just did everything 25 minutes. Now I have to redo 25 minutes of content. I'm really mad. Anyhow, no big deal. We're going to save this. All right, so you design this thing and then make it reality. Okay, make sure we're going to take off our active class here. All right, great. So now let's focus on adding rule sets for main, because it needs to be white background, obviously. So what we'll do is, sorry, I'm getting everything organized on my other monitor after having to record everything again. So now, so for our main, we're going to say background white. All right, so FFF. We're also going to put a padding of 1 EM and 1.4 EM. All right, so it's top, bottom, 1 EM, and on the right and left, it'll be 1.4. All right, we'll also reference our H1 element. All right, so margin 0. We're just going to get rid of the top. There's a little bit of margin by default that's added on the H1 element. So we can see it just moves it up. All right, also our paragraph element. So P font size 1.1 EM. So we're making it a little bit bigger. And also the line height, which controls the spacing between the lines, 1.5 EM. All right, there we go. I think I like that look better. And of course, I'm getting these values. You know, initially I was experimenting with them when I did the project setup. So that's how I knew to use 1.1, 1.5, just experiment to see what it looks like. And then our call to action button, we need to add that HTML. It's the final line of HTML that we're going to have. This feels like Groundhog Day right now. So it's an ahref. It's not going anywhere. In a class of CTA. All right, so it's a class which I have not covered yet, is like an ID. An ID is just a unique identifier. There's only going to be one. A class is something that could be applied multiple times. So if you had multiple links where you wanted to be styled the same, you would have a class instead of an ID. So CTA stands for call to action. We want it to look like this. So there's quite a bit of CSS properties involved in that, because if we go back here and we save this, we have to put in my portfolio as the anchor text. You can see it looks nothing like that blue button. So the way we do this is we start adding properties. So display block. All right, when you needed to add that on an A element, it doesn't have that by default. That allows you to add padding and stuff like that. Color, we're going to make the text white, so it's going to be hidden temporarily. Then we're going to make our background that blue color that we were using, which happens to be 0, E7, and FFF. All right, so now we can see it. Text decoration, we're going to say none. We're going to say padding is 8 pixels on the top and bottom and 50 pixels on the right and left. So you don't always have to use EM. We're going to put font size at 1.2 EM to make it slightly larger. We're also going to put font align. We want it to be in the center. Oops, and I spelled it wrong. Or text align, sorry. I did not spell it wrong. I just had my properties mixed up. Text align is going to be in center. And the font weight is going to be bold. All right. And then the border radius for the rounded corners is going to be around 4 pixels. You can see it just updates it slightly. And then margin, top and bottom is going to be 2 EM and 0 on the right and left. All right, awesome. So we're going to say that we're happy with that for the actual design of the mobile portion. So now we're going to start using media queries. So if we get rid of this device view and we scale this thing in, we can say this is what it looks like on like a mobile phone. But when we scale this out, there's a certain point where it doesn't make sense anymore to have just a hamburger icon menu, because we have enough screen real estate now to where we can show it and do something more like this over here, a sidebar. All right, so we do that with what are called media queries. And notice we can have these little pixel representations when you hit Control-Shift-I and have this developer console up. That shows on the very first value is the width of the browser. 768 is generally a breakpoint, as it's called, where you can begin to change from a mobile to more of like a tablet or a desktop view. But really, just do it wherever you think the layout should change, or if it starts to break or something. Right around here, it's getting a little bit too much. So we have more screen real estate. So we'll say at 768 is going to be our first media query, or right here. So it's going to put at media, only screen, and inside the parentheses, we'll have a minimum width of 768. And then we just close it or we open up curly braces like we would any other rule set. So we put rule sets inside of here that will only apply to the screen and the viewport, as it's called, where it's at 768 pixels or more. And so this is how we do first mobile first up here, and then we work our way up as we need to. All right, so the very first selector that we want to change in order to change that layout from mobile to this desktop is the body tag, because we have the body tag right here, and this is our basically 768 and above view. We have 2 columns. We have this one and then this one. Now over here we only had 1 column, but we had 2 rows. So this right here is essentially the same thing as this in terms of the HTML and the structure of the HTML. But these are stacked horizontally, which is a natural behavior of the browser when it comes to HTML and structuring it. But now we need to turn this into a CSS grid with 2 columns so we can structure these right and left of each other. All right, so we'll say body. We're turning this into a CSS grid. So we say display grid. And then grid template columns. We're going to have 2 of them. We'll say that that left sidebar should take 20% or so of the browser view, and then auto for the remaining content to the right of it. And then we'll say padding 2 EM on the bottom so that we can actually see what's happening. All right, so now this is what it looks like after 768. We can see how it changes. Now we obviously have some more work to do, so let's go ahead with that. So we're going to go ahead and say our image, which is the hamburger icon menu, we don't need to see that. You see it right there. So let's go put display none, save it. There it goes. It's no longer present because we're in that viewport. It shows up and then it gets hidden. All right, and then we'll say our aside, which is really our left sidebar container. Our background, we're gonna make it that color over here, which is right there. Grab that color code, put it in, save it. Let's get this pushed over here so you can see a little bit more of what's happening. So we're also going to say grid template columns auto. So we only have 1 column here, but there's 2 rows of content if we refer back to this section right here. This avatar, this is in the figure HTML element, and then our nav element right here. And this is one way we can go ahead and do this. So we can also add grid template rows, because we have 2 rows. 20% for that figure section where it has the avatar and name, and then auto for the rest. All right, so you can see how it kind of structured things. Still doesn't look quite right though. Let's hit padding 0. All right, so now it's going to move everything up to the very edges, but we're going to fix that, don't worry. So now let's focus on our main section, which is over here to the right. Don't worry, we'll get to that stuff momentarily. What we'll say is the padding section, we want to put more, or the main section, we want to put more padding on it. So main, we'll say padding is 4 EM. All right. And then the background, we're going to say white, but we also want that SVG graphic, if you recall. So over here, we click on it. You go to export and selected, and then make sure you're in images and just call it, just hit export. I already did this because I did this once already. So in the images folder, it's going to be called path1 if you didn't rename it. Just right click, rename it, and change it to bg.svg right here. So I'm just going to delete this. Okay, now we'll keep going back here. So the way we reference that is we put URL, and then we put in single quotes. We're going to get out of the current directory, which is the CSS directory, into the images folder, and then bg.svg. And then we're going to also add the background properties of no repeat, or background values rather, because we don't want the background to repeat. And we also want to position it to the bottom right. All right, so now if we get this over here, we can see it, and it also scales with the content. Still, I know it does not look very good, and that's expected though. Okay, so let's keep on going. We're also going to add, we can also change the size because this looks pretty big, the back of that SVG graphic. So we're going to say background size, which is another property we can use, 70%. All right, so that scales it down just a bit. Okay, so let's also talk about the avatar. It's not up there, but we never styled it because we decided not to have it in the mobile first view. So avatar, which is the ID associated with our div right there, let's make it that circle the way it looks like over here. All right, so we do, we'll go ahead and put border radius 50%, and that's how you completely round off something and make it a circle. Background, we're going to make it white. And then we have to give it a width of, we'll make 50 pixels, and height 50 pixels. Save it, and we see it over here in a second. All right, and then we want to align it to the center, but also give it some margin. And we can align it through the center through margin auto on the right and left. Up to this point, we've either put in margin with 4 EM, 1 value, or 2 values for top right, bottom left. You can also do 4 values if you need to have unique values for each of the sides. So the very first property or value is 2 EM at the top. We're going to make auto on the right, and this is for centering. 1 EM on the bottom, and then auto on the top right, left. Top right, bottom left. There we go. All right. So let's also reference our fig caption, which holds the Johnny Doe name. So fig caption is going to be text align center, and then color is black. All right. And now let's also get our unordered list, because it's not here because currently it's being hidden from the mobile first rule sets up here. But we need to show it now that we're in this larger viewport. So we're going to put in UL, all right, and we're going to put display block. That's going to show it. We're also going to put in margin top 2 EM. Just push it away a little bit. And then also, this next part's real important. So right now, we can see it showing up. It still doesn't look exactly correct, and we'll fix that soon. But right now, it's working as it should. But what happens when we click this? And then maybe the person clicked the menu, they're in a portrait mode on their phone, and then they decide to turn their phone to a landscape. All of a sudden, the viewport maybe has changed to this, and look, it's still overlapping this thing up here. We don't want that, obviously. So the way we could do that is we can reset some of those values. So we can say, because right now the active class that's added to it is position absolute, we're going to change it to position relative, and we're going to add an important flag which will help overwrite those styles. All right, so we'll also add background. We don't want any background. And then also we'll add the width and make it 100% at important. All right, so now you can see if we refresh, we click this and go back, it won't remain on top anymore, essentially. All right, and then if we get rid of it, it'll still work as well. Awesome. Okay, so let's continue on. Another thing, I think there's a couple properties I may have missed. I'm noticing, for instance, this background isn't working. It's not looking exactly like, where is it at? Right here. This right now should be looking like that. So looking back here, we have our aside. All right, we have our background color right there, and we could see it right there, but I definitely missed a property. So I'm going to leave this in the video because right now I'm confused, and you're going to be confused almost on every single project that you do. It's just a natural way of things. What we can do is we can click this little icon here, and we can figure out why things are not working. It says the background of our nav is white. All right, so what we can do is just remove that. There we go. Background should not be white of our nav element. So what we'll do is say nav background none. So now when we save it, there we go. By default, it is how it should behave. Okay, so also real cool, what if we wanted to hover over these and we wanted to change the color? All right, well, we can use right here, ULLIA, and then we use what's called a pseudo class of hover. So the properties will only apply when this element, the selector, is being hovered upon. All right, so we can say background color white. Awesome stuff. All right, so let's continue on. The call to action button shouldn't be that big on desktop. As we can see, it's smaller here. So let's go ahead and fix that. We can go ahead and put our CTA, that's the class we added to it. And you reference classes with periods and IDs with the hash sign. So display, we're going to say inline block. That's another potential value. And then also font size at 1.3 EM, padding at 0.8 EM on the top and bottom, 3 EM on the right and left. And there we go. Now let's also make things a little bit bigger for H1 and our paragraph element. So H1, font size is going to be 3 EM. And then also margin top will be 2 EM. We're going to push things down. And then also we'll have our paragraph. Make that a little bit larger, 1.5 EM. All right. And there we go. Awesome, awesome stuff. So let's get things situated here. As we see, we're at a desktop. Let's go from mobile real quick. Mobile, 768 coming up, and there we go. Awesome, awesome, awesome. So at this point, you can even add more media queries if you wanted to. Chances are, you're working on a real project, you would probably want to add more media queries. Like just for instance, somebody on a 4K resolution monitor who has their design maximized, it may end up looking like this. I'm on a 1920 just for the recording purposes, but if I hit Control and the minus, I can simulate what it would look at like. So you can see you might want to bring this in from 20% of this column right here, maybe down to 10% on a real large size like 1600 pixels min width media query. And then also maybe increase the size of this stuff, increase the size of the padding and all of that. But we're not going to do that. This is already a real long tutorial, but hopefully you found value in that. All right, so hopefully that wasn't too much of a crash course for you. You're probably going to be quite disoriented still, but still, listen, make sure you subscribe here. I cover a lot of different topics. Get your feet wet. Try to reproduce the same thing we did, maybe do a different style of design, and just work at it. Trust me, it will pay off in the end, and you will understand it. So also, make sure to answer today's question, which is, do you want to be a full stack developer or just focus on design or code? All right, guys, make sure you subscribe. See you later.